Scott's drinking a beer. I think he's got one of those girly beers.
He might not let me drive yet.
You may not be able to drive.
Hey, Scott, have me a beer. Scott? We better not ever tell John we caught fish here because other way, John, you're looking out your window, bud.
Don't touch your boat, Caleb. I might need to borrow it.
That's good because it's got 20 gallons of gas in it, and I'd have to touch it to fill it up for you. What do we do? What are we even doing here? We're good. No, I don't think it does.
No, we're not. May even be able to see some of our ugly mugs on Captain Caleb TV, and that's a spoiler alert.
I'm sitting here looking at the actuals right now. According to the weather station there between Sargent and Matagorda, it touched 5 feet over normal, and right now it's back down to 1.8 over. One thing that's kind of a positive to me is the water temp is 76.8 right now instead of the upper 80s where it's been. So if we got that big influx and that big pool today and don't get hit with the freshwater too bad,
let's go fishing.
I think this could be very positive. I really do.
Let's go fishing.
I put out a video a month ago when that other stinking hurricane was coming, talking about all this stuff and asking for, a Cat 1, and that dang hurricane took a right and just wiped out our friends in Louisiana. So my video is a month early, but this is as far as I can tell at the moment, this is kind of what we needed to maybe get things kicked off down there.
What would be your advice as far as actually getting back out on the water?
I would think anything around drains. Some of the back lakes are probably going to be holding fish that they weren't holding before because of the cooler water. That's going to push some fish back further in. Then all the drains being dumped out, from this super high. And like I said, we didn't get any rain either. I'd venture to say we maybe got 2 to 3 inches. Hell, we get that in a little thunderstorm.
Right.
So freshwater influx is not going to be a problem. It didn't go to the hill country, which is what it affects me.
Yeah, it all drains back down.
Yeah, if it goes and hits the Guadalupe River, that's when San Antonio Bay gets blown out.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't go that way. It went to our friends in Louisiana. So we lucked out. I think we lucked out all the way around. We got the best of the hurricane. We got the flushing, got everything cleaned out, got all those baby redfish, hopefully, from the big spawn, came on into the bay, got up in the marsh, all those eggs, and we'll see the results of this in a few years.
Caleb, what are you doing? I know you're going to be on the water.
Scott, did you see the wave heights inside the Port O'Connor jetties yesterday?
But I think I saw 21 feet.
Yeah, 21 to 23 inside the jetties.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, if there's a redfish in there doing his thing, those eggs are going somewhere. They're going somewhere.
Those eggs are in Victoria.
Yeah. They might be up here in Lake Houston where I am right now. Go ahead.
Scott and I are really similar in the way that we fish, but I'll kind of bounce back and forth with Pat here. We've been seeing birds working sporadically here and there over the past, 30 days or so, with that big tide pushing in and then ripping back out. You might luck into some birds working, where it's pulling all that smaller bait back out of the grass. But whether it wanted to come or not, that bait's coming out now.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I think it lined everything up kind of perfect for our bait system, the way the storm hit and pushed all that water in. And then on the backside, we had that northwest wind. It's going to flush it all out. We basically got a huge flush of the bay. If I was going to get out there right now with the tide still over normal, I'd be looking to wade fish areas that maybe aren't normally even underwater. They'll stack in certain areas on reefs that maybe are usually a foot out of the water that I now have 2 feet on top of them. I know in the past, it's played huge on the backside of these storms, even dirty water, bait just stacking on top of reefs that are usually way out of the water. And I have a feeling that's a story you're about to tell about my dad.
That is the story.
I would be looking to do some things like that. And I think this is going to do nothing but really help our bait system. I'm excited for this weekend.
Yeah, Pat was talking about the higher tides. I was going to tell off on myself. One of my tournament victories that I had was a deal that, I don't know, there's 15 or 20 boats in it. And it was Pat was a guide, I was a guide, and we were taking groups out. And we was just this time of year, it was big tides. And Pat had found some fish. And what they were is they were stacked right up against the grass. There's 2 feet of water on the grass. And so Pat and I, we went and fished the same, 200 yards of shoreline, Pat? Maybe 250.
Yep.
And, my guys got lucky and caught them. I had some pretty, one of my customers had won the trout masters twice. So
Wow.
I had good fishermen, but with these big tides, those fish were right on the grass, picking that bait off that was getting pulled out of there. So Pat's spot on. I'm maybe waiting some stuff that's too shallow the rest of the year.
You and Patrick, start with you. Wade fishing right now is probably the way you're going to go if you can. And what are you looking for? Because all that bait's coming in, but it's going to be kind of everywhere. You said drains earlier. It's not just going to be there though, right?
No, Pat and I don't really have this option in East Bay, but in West Bay, the grass beds should be really good right now because that little bait's going to get sucked out, and it's going to be just when it gets sucked out of the drain doesn't mean it gives up and dies. It's going to try to find a way to hide somewhere. So grass beds are going to be really good. In fact, that tournament I was talking about, we were fishing some grass, and there was little tiny bait just all over that grass. And while there was bait and fish against the shoreline, I think our big trout of the day was 29 inches, and that one came about 50 yards off the shoreline, off of a grass bed. So grass, shell, anything that they could harbor that smaller bait doesn't necessarily. If you can't get in front of a drain, there's somebody else's boat parked there. If you went and fished it and you didn't catch anything there, anything that can harbor bait and provide it some refuge could be another great place to check.
And Pat, I want to get your thoughts on that, but also I can just feel our listeners, I can sense their questions. Okay, but what are you throwing? What are you throwing? Because, obviously we can throw a cork, you can throw soft plastic. What would you be starting with and what are you looking at?
I'm going to first be looking at the watercolor. Who knows really what it's going to look like out there in the bay. As far as throwing artificial, if you're throwing live bait, it doesn't tend to matter as much. But I'm going to be looking at watercolor and the amount of bait. I'm going to be looking for areas that are stacked with bait. Like I said, probably close up to the shoreline, and I'm going to have a super spook on for sure.
You're going to be on the top water. Pretty much you can go all day long, and we've talked about that on the podcast, but you can scare up, Patrick, you can scare up something pretty much all day with that top water right now.
Yeah, people think it's a morning time bait. There'll be days that I keep it on the entire day. Right now it's been super hit or miss. We're going through waves of the top water bite's been phenomenal. It'll stay like that for a week, and then all of a sudden it'll die, and you don't for one reason or another, I can't really put my finger on it, but we'll switch back over to soft plastics and still been able to catch them. And I know top waters, you lose a ton of fish, and a lot of people's things, I don't want to throw a top water because they don't always get it. Well, I mean, there's nothing I like more than catching big fish on a top water, and right now is a really good time to do it.
And one other thing, we've been talking about reefs and whatever structure or even grass beds or shorelines that are covered with grass that are now maybe covered with water. I think every bay, Caleb, I'm gonna start with you, has some sort of quote bird island or some sort of oyster reef or some sort of harder type reef. Let's just put it bluntly, that has been covered with poop for months, with seagulls and birds and all kinds of just nature running its course. I'm starting there flat out, because all that stuff gets covered up, washed out, it starts churning, and then there you go with kind of the food chain working its way up, correct?
No, that's an excellent point that you make. That's what mullet and a lot of those smaller fish eat. They sit there and peck on algae and, little stuff that we don't want to acknowledge they eat, because then the trout eats them and then we eat the trout, right?
That's right.
But no, I mean, it's certainly it's an opportunity. But right now, I just think there's going to be a lot of bait out there, and whether you go up on your poopy reef or my grass bed or Pat's drain, I mean, it ought to be pretty obvious that there's fish there. And with this cooling of the water and all that, I think it's going to trigger the fish to kind of come alive. I call this time of year the dog days, and and I think Pat or any other guide will agree. Every day when we go out, we're not sure if we're going to have a good day or not, because yesterday could be great, tomorrow could be great, but it's so dang hit and miss. And it seems like when that water cools off and when these northwest winds come and that starts moving back and forth, that kind of turns them on and gets them going. So I look for it to be pretty good for a while. If we keep getting little fronts and whatnot, it could stay good. It could get hot again and slow it down again until we get into our October pattern. But I think that right now, whatever area it is you choose to look at, I think it's going to be fairly apparent that there are or are not bait and or fish there.
This is a first, because when you're recording a podcast on Zoom, you can get pop-up messages from your Facebook page. So I'm going to ask you this question, which is very, very appropriate, and then I'll get to Pat as well. But the question just popped up from a Facebook friend. Hey man, does this cooler weather kick off the fall pattern sooner than it would have otherwise? We've been talking about some of the quote benefits that we're going to be able to experience as fishermen. My gut tells me yes. I don't know what you think.
Oh, I thought you were calling me out for the post I just made on Facebook.
Oh man, what did you say? Are you making fun of us?
We're good. No, I don't think it does.
No, we're not.
I don't think it does. I think that we're going to see, a little bit of positivity from it right now. I think that it is setting us up for a better fall coming up. But to truly get into that fall pattern, from my experience, what I believe to really kick it off are two real cold fronts. And I'm not talking cool fronts. I'm
I
talking
said the
about
exact same thing the other day. Yeah.
yeah. I'm talking about the blasters out of the Northwest that it gets cold. And it only needs, it can only stay cold for 6 hours. It doesn't matter, but it drops the water temperature, it drops the tide, and then that signals, it pushes the shrimp and all that out and everything goes. But I think without another one behind this, I think without even cooler temperatures than what we're seeing now, no, I don't think that is going to completely kick off the fall pattern.
Well, Pat, one thing I do like, and I'm curious what your thoughts, your strategizing, if you will, might be, the water temperatures figure to at least go down a little bit. What does that do for you as you get onto the bays?
Yeah, like I said earlier, the topwater bite, I feel like it makes the fish more aggressive and they feed in a higher water column. They feel that cooler temperature. It's also, at one point when the air is cooler than the water, they're going to want to be up in that higher water column, and it makes the topwater bite phenomenal. That's why I said I'm going to be these smaller fronts, like Caleb said, it's not going to kick everything off. But when we get these just little like influxes of cooler weather, it makes those fish more aggressive to really come up to the top. And I think the bite period gets better with these smaller fronts, but it's not really going to kick off as far as the fall fishing till we get those big fronts. But with these little ones and with these little tiny temperature drops, I look for the fishing just to steadily increase.
Scott, I'm curious your thought on that, on both of those points, with the fronts and the water temp. Does it maybe get them a little friskier?
I think it gets them friskier because the oxygen levels. The cooler water can hold more oxygen.
Yeah.
You get the launch, you get the water churning up with the waves, you get more oxygen in there. Then that cooler water can actually physically hold more oxygen, a higher oxygen level.
Right.
So that's probably a big part of what kicks it off. And think about your bait. If you run bait, we run oxygen to them. If you run the tournaments, you want to run oxygen to your fish.
Mm-hmm.
Oxygen makes them friskier, keeps them alive better.
We work real hard to keep our water cool too.
Yep.
In the summertime,
exactly.
we work real hard to keep that water cool.
I got it. As we were talking, I saw a buddy of mine post that he got 20 inches of rain in Galveston.
Yikes.
So what we've been talking about, this thing was a wind event and it didn't really rain all that much. Now from Galveston back towards Louisiana, folks listening from that direction, it's a whole different ball game. They got a lot more wind than we got. They got a lot more water. I can kind of help you out a little bit with that because of Harvey. I had right behind Harvey, I had to fish, and I had guys coming down, and I went out scouting, and I could not find a fish anywhere. I spent all afternoon, all morning, all afternoon looking. Dirty water everywhere. I pulled out of the back of the marsh, and I was on the outside of Pringle, and just happened to see a clear streak right up against the shoreline. So I got on it. Every redfish in the entire bay was there. All the way down for like 2 miles. It was solid redfish.
Sure.
Sure. That's probably not good.
Well, and Caleb, this is another example of saltwater perhaps underneath some fresh water in some of these areas, and maybe go to the bottom, use that as a strategy, because just because it looks bad on the top doesn't mean that it's bad a foot underneath.
It was this time a couple of years ago after an event like this. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but on the north shoreline of East Bay, the water was just the nastiest brown stuff you've ever
Yep.
seen in your life. But if you drove your boat through it, there'd be a green streak behind you where it was about 4 or 5 inches of fresh water and then just salt water underneath it. And you could absolutely smash fish over there